My name is Olivia Green. I'm 32 years old, a financial consultant living in New York. About a month ago, I got a text from my mom just before midnight. We're postponing the family trip to next year, sweetheart. We just can't afford it. I stayed silent. But 2 days later, while scrolling through Facebook during my lunch break, I saw a photo of my whole family smiling on a beach, laughing over a seafood dinner with the caption, "Family time is priceless." I wasn't in that priceless moment. I was never part of the plan. Have you ever been left out of something important by your own family? Have they ever lied just to quietly leave you behind? If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own home, leave a comment, hit like and subscribe. Because my story is just beginning. I sat on my bed for a long time after reading that text, the glow from my phone screen casting a pale light on my face in the stillness of my apartment. That small fifth-floor unit in an old Brooklyn building had never felt colder. Mom said the trip was canceled because they didn't have enough money. I understood. I truly did. I knew what it meant to tighten a budget, because I had been living penny to penny for months just so I could be there with them. It wasn't supposed to be a luxury vacation. We had planned it nearly a year in advance. A simple 4-day trip to South Carolina, the place filled with childhood memories. I remembered sitting in the backseat of Dad's car, the ocean breeze whipping my hair, my sister's laughter echoing across the damp sand. Every time they talked about going back, my heart ached with longing. I dreamed of that return as a chance to reconnect, to not feel like the outsider anymore. So when the plan was set, I did everything I could to be a part of it. I picked up extra weekend shifts at the cafe near my office, serving coffee to regulars in the early Saturday mornings. I didn't mind standing for 8 hours straight on sore feet, or going home with the smell of grease and kitchen smoke in my hair. I just kept thinking about waking up near the shore, having breakfast with my parents, laughing with my sister without that tight feeling in my chest. One evening after a late shift, I called Mom while walking home. I told her that if things were tough, I could cover my own share. I already checked flights, I said, trying to sound hopeful. If I book early, it's only around $200. She was quiet for a moment, then sighed. It's not just about you, Olivia. Everything's gone up, hotels, rental cars. We just can't swing it right now, but next year will be different. I promise. I forced a smile, though she couldn't see it. Hey, I understand. But the truth was, I wasn't sure I could keep believing in promises that never came true. I remembered the times Mom said she'd come to my graduation, only to cancel at the last minute. I remembered my 27th birthday, just a single message from her at nearly midnight. "Happy birthday. Busy right now. I'll call later." After that call, I quietly opened my laptop and transferred the money I'd saved for the trip into my emergency fund. I closed the browser and didn't let myself dwell on disappointment. I told myself that if not this year, then next. At least they thought of me. At least they told me. At least I was still part of the conversation. But deep down, something tightened. Not because the trip was canceled, but because of how they said it. Like the decision had nothing to do with me. No one asked for my input. No text before the announcement. I wasn't considered, I was simply informed. Like my place in this family had long been downgraded to observer. Someone on the sidelines, outside the plans, outside the feelings. I remember going back to the cafe after work that night, grabbing my apron and signing up for every evening shift the following week. "Still saving for that trip?" my manager asked when she saw the schedule. I nodded. Something like that. But inside, something had already started closing off. Over the next few days, I forced myself not to dwell on it. I stayed busier than usual, took on more reports at work, added overtime, enrolled in a short course on household financial planning. I filled the space with work, with things I could measure, control. Because my family wasn't something I could measure. Still, every free moment brought me back to that beach. To the waves, the sun-soaked sand, the dinners by the sea. I kept picturing them all sitting together, until I'd remind myself I wasn't in that picture anymore. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment of truth, when Facebook quietly exposed the thing I had tried so hard to believe in. That afternoon, I was sitting alone at my usual cafe on the corner, sandwich cold in my hand, eyes wandering blankly across my phone screen. The sky was overcast. A breeze slipped through the window glass and I pulled my sweater tighter. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't lift the cup. There was a fatigue in me that felt deeper than sleep, like someone who had given every bit of trust she had left and got silence in return. I opened Facebook, just a reflex. My finger scrolled past cat photos, food pictures, Monday complaints, until I saw a name I knew too well. Emily Green. My sister. I froze. The photo that popped up was sun-drenched. My mom under a giant beach umbrella, her wind-blown hair still somehow neat, smiling wide with a bright orange cocktail in her hand. Emily was lounging beside her in a flowing maxi dress, sunglasses on. And next to her, my dad, smiling broadly, holding up a perfectly grilled crab. I stared at the image for several seconds, unable to move. Like someone had slammed something heavy straight into my chest. Then my eyes dropped to the caption, "Family time is priceless." My throat tightened. My lips went dry. I didn't even have time to react before Facebook slid to the next photo. All three of them stood on a boat deck, endless blue ocean behind them. Mom's hand rested on Dad's arm. Emily held her fingers in a heart shape. No space left for me. I scrolled faster. My heart pounded. My head buzzed like all the blood had rushed to my ears. Dinner by the sea. Red wine. The seafood I used to crave. Bonfires on the beach, laughter under the stars, relaxed faces full of joy. I kept scrolling. I kept looking. I let myself fall into every moment I wasn't invited to live. At the end of the album, Emily posted a short video. Her voice chimed, "Nothing better than being together as a family." Mom smiled, nodded. "Family is what matters most." Dad winked at the camera. "Nothing beats this." I set my phone down on the table. My hands were clenched so tight they had turned pale. I couldn't hear the cafe anymore. No spoons clinking, no doorbells ringing. Everything blurred and faded into static. I had believed them. I thought they were making sacrifices because of money. I had tried to be understanding. I turned down weekend plans, didn't buy the bag I loved just to save up. I did everything for what we called the family trip. But they went. Without a word. Without giving me a chance to decide for myself. They simply removed me quietly, as if my presence didn't matter. I opened the first photo again. Mom smiling so brightly. The sunlight kissing her cheek like it belonged there. I looked at the caption again, "Family time is priceless." I let out a dry laugh I couldn't control. I wanted to scream. To ask them, "Am I part of your idea of family? Or am I just the spare you remember when you need someone to help with bills or take on responsibility, but forget when it's time to celebrate?" I held my phone ready to call Mom. But my finger hovered over the dial and stopped. I knew what she would say. That it was last minute. That she didn't want me to feel hurt. That Dad decided. I'd heard them all before. My entire life. I put the phone down, stood up, and walked out of the cafe. I couldn't sit there any longer. I couldn't pretend things were fine. I needed air. I needed to breathe. As I walked along the sidewalk, wind whipping through my hair, every emotion cracked open inside me. It wasn't anger anymore. It was emptiness. Like I had just lost something I could never get back. A fragile kind of trust, finally shattered. And even though I didn't yet know what I would do next, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to stay silent. Not when they shut the door and pretended no one had ever stood outside it. I walked quickly through the familiar streets like someone no longer feeling the ground beneath her feet. Each step felt heavy, like I was carrying the weight of a stormy sky, and each gust of wind reminded me of the truth I couldn't shake. They had chosen to leave me out. Without a word. Without looking back. Without thinking I'd ever find out. I stopped at the corner of a small park near home, where an old stone bench sat beneath a bare tree. I used to play there when I was little, waiting with a book while Mom ran errands at the bank. I sat down, looking up at the brittle branches trembling in the wind. In that moment, I didn't just feel abandoned because of a trip. I realized I had been left behind for years. I just hadn't allowed myself to admit it. How many birthdays of mine had passed unnoticed? When I was 25, I sat alone eating instant noodles in my one-bedroom apartment, waiting for a call from Mom. She finally called, not to wish me happy birthday, but to ask if I could help pay for the family's new washing machine. When I was 28, I had just completed a major project at work and received an award. I called her excited. She replied with a short, "That's nice," and then switched the topic to how Emily was about to open her own boutique. The memories rushed in like a current. dragging me into every holiday gathering where I stood alone on the edge of a crowded room. Everyone laughed, hovered around Emily, complimenting her dress, her hair. I'd sit by the stove holding a cup of cold tea. Sometimes I wondered, was I so invisible that if I disappeared would anyone notice? I kept making excuses for them. That my parents were busy. That Emily needed more attention because she was fragile. That I was strong and didn't need as much care. I believed those things for a long time. But the more I believed, the further I drifted. The more I pretended not to feel anything, the deeper I sank into a loneliness I couldn't name. And then today, when I saw that picture of my mom laughing on the beach, without me, something inside cracked. Not because I wasn't there, but because of the indifference. Because they didn't see leaving me out as a problem. Because they assumed I'd accept it like I always had. But I wasn't that quiet girl anymore. I sat up straight. The wind blew through my hair. I let myself feel the anger. Not the kind that makes you want to break something. The kind that smolders deep, born from pain that's been buried too long. I didn't want to be polite anymore. I didn't want to stay silent just to keep the peace while I was written out of the family picture I should have been in. I took out my phone, pulled up the photo from Facebook. My hand trembled slightly, but my eyes stayed steady. I looked at my mom, my dad, and my sister smiling on that beach. And I made a promise to myself. This would be the last time they thought I wasn't important enough to hear the truth. I didn't need them to see me angry. I needed them to face what they had done. I would wait. I would look them in the eye. And I would demand answers. That night I skipped dinner. I just boiled a pot of tea, sat at my little kitchen table, and wrote down every thought in an old notebook. Not to let resentment grow, but to organize the truth inside me. I wrote down everything I wanted to say to them. Not to hurt them, but to make sure they could no longer pretend. I remember each line. Why did you think I wasn't mature enough to hear the truth? Why didn't you see that hiding it from me was a betrayal of trust? And Emily, how could you post pictures, share every moment, and not once think to send your sister a message? I didn't know if they were ready to hear it. But I knew that if I didn't say it, I wouldn't be able to live with my own self-respect. I had been silent long enough. And I would be the one to speak first. Not to beg for acknowledgement, but to reclaim my place, not in their hearts but in the story of my own life. I didn't text. I didn't call. I didn't react. I didn't leave any comments under those sunny, perfect posts. I let everything pass as if I hadn't seen a thing. But every day I watched. Every new image was another cut to the heart, each one sharpening my resolve. I didn't want to confront them through a screen. I didn't want broken sentences over a phone call where it's easy to make excuses, to dodge, to hang up when things get uncomfortable. I wanted to look them in the eye. I wanted to see their faces when they realized I knew everything. I wanted to know if they still had the nerve to tell me it was just a misunderstanding. So I stayed silent but not passive. I spent the next 3 days making a plan. I went to work as usual, still brewed coffee for customers, still sent in my reports on time. But inside, everything was moving with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I knew exactly when they'd return. Mom always booked her flights weeks in advance. Always arrived back on Saturday afternoon, because she didn't like early morning flights on Sunday. I remembered because last year she called me at 7 a.m. to complain about a long security line at the airport. Details like that. I always remembered, even if they never seemed to remember anything about me. I cleaned my apartment. Not to welcome guests but to clear my mind. I wiped every bookshelf, sorted papers, washed the dishes piled in the sink. Somewhere in that process I opened the bottom drawer, where I kept old photos, birthday cards from childhood, and crumpled drawings I once gave Mom. I picked up a photo of the 3 of us at Myrtle Beach when I was 9. Mom was hugging Emily and I stood next to them, clutching a teddy bear, forcing a smile. I looked closely at my own eyes in that photo. Eyes of a little girl who just wanted to be noticed. That photo didn't hurt the way it used to. It made me alert. That Saturday afternoon, I arrived at my parents' house an hour early. I knew they weren't home yet, but I needed time to face the space before I faced the people inside it. The house hadn't changed much. The same old gray sofa, the wedding portrait on the wall, and Emily's graduation photo framed in the center of the living room. I looked around and saw no pictures of me. I sat at the dining table. The same place I used to eat in silence while everyone else talked about Emily's latest plans, her new boyfriend, her new shoes, her latest cold. I never blamed my sister for being loved. But I never stopped hurting from never being seen as someone worth loving that way. I waited. At exactly 4:18 p.m., the familiar yellow taxi pulled up at the gate. Through the curtain, I saw my dad step out first, open the trunk for the luggage. Mom followed, wearing sunglasses, dragging a suitcase with a little purple ribbon on the handle. Emily wore a wide-brimmed hat, carrying a white leather bag. They were all tanned, hair tousled from the beach breeze, shirts still smelling faintly of salt. They looked relaxed. They looked happy. I didn't move. The door opened. The sound of rolling luggage echoed on the tile. Mom stepped in first. When she saw me sitting there, she froze, clearly startled. "Olivia." Her voice jumped a pitch, then quickly shifted into brightness. "Oh, sweetheart. I didn't know you were here." I lifted my head and looked her in the eye. "I know." Dad entered next, set his bag down, and gave me a nod like I was just some neighbor dropping by. Emily came in last, glanced at me, paused slightly, then smiled faintly. "You doing okay?" she asked, lowering her hat, voice light. "Fine," I answered. My tone steadier than I expected. "How was the trip?" Mom looked at Dad, then at me. "Well, it was nice. We just needed a little break. Nothing special." I nodded slowly. "Really?" I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, opened the photo gallery, and set it face up on the table. The screen lit up, showing the beach picture, Emily's exact post. "Then explain this to me," I said, my voice low and deliberate. No one said a word for the first 10 seconds. Not a sound. Not even a clear breath. Emily glanced at Mom. My dad shifted back slightly, like he wanted to escape the room. My mom raised a hand to her chest as if trying to steady her heartbeat. I didn't say anything more. I just waited. I had waited my whole life for them to truly see me. And now they would have to. My mom stood there, keys still in her hand, her eyes frozen somewhere between shock and confusion. The air in the house suddenly thickened, like an invisible fog had just swept in through the doorway. I looked straight into her eyes and didn't look away. "We need to talk." My voice wasn't loud or shaky, but it hit the tiled floor like metal against stone. My mom didn't respond right away. She glanced toward Dad, then at Emily. All three of them stood still, like they were waiting for someone else to speak first. But I was the one setting the pace. "Sit down," I said, pointing to the chairs at the dining table. "All three of you." Mom placed her purse on the living room couch and slowly walked over. My dad reluctantly pulled out a chair, and Emily crossed her arms, her expression trying to hide the discomfort creeping across her face. I stood opposite them, feeling like I was facing an old wall, familiar on the outside, but full of cracks I had never dared to examine until now. "I saw the pictures," I said, not sugarcoating it. "All of them. Every photo. Every video. Every caption." Mom opened her mouth, maybe about to say something, but I raised my hand gently to stop her. "Please don't start with excuses. I didn't come here to hear things like, 'It wasn't intentional,' or, 'It's not what you think.'" Emily raised an eyebrow, her tone flat. "So what do you want to hear?" I turned to look directly at her. "The truth. Or at least an admission. That you all made the decision to go without even thinking of me. That I was excluded like it was nothing. No one asked me. No one told me the truth." Emily shrugged, her voice a little softer now. "You're blowing this out of proportion. It was just a vacation." "Just a vacation?" I repeated, my eyes burning while my tone stayed calm. "A vacation I spent 3 months working extra shifts to save for. A vacation Mom said we'd plan together. A vacation I believed would bring us closer again. You think that was just a vacation?" No one answered. My dad stared down at the table like the scratch in the wood had suddenly become more interesting than anything I was saying. Mom closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. Her voice was rough when she finally spoke. "Olivia, I'm sorry. We were wrong." I didn't respond. I waited. She went on, her hands folding slightly in her lap. "At first, I was going to call you. But then I thought if I said it out loud, you'd be hurt even more. I figured if we just postponed it, at least, you wouldn't have to feel left out." I let out a laugh, not loud but cold. "So you chose to lie. To pretend the trip didn't happen while the three of you posted photos every day online." Mom lowered her head. "I was wrong." I nodded slightly, then looked over at my dad. "And you?" He took a deep breath. "Your mother made the call, and I didn't object. I thought you were grown. That you'd understand. That's not the first time you've said that, I replied evenly. But have you ever asked yourself if I've ever even been asked? If anyone's ever actually asked how I feel? He didn't answer. My question just hung there in the silence, then fell with a weight no one picked up. I turned to Emily. Do you know how hard I've tried to be included in anything with this family? How many times I was the one reaching out, suggesting, asking? And every time all I got was a half-hearted nod, then silence. Do you even know? Emily didn't answer. For the first time I saw her lower her gaze. Even if only for a few seconds. I took a deep breath. I didn't come here to cause drama. But I won't be quiet anymore. I won't keep guessing whether I'm worthy enough to be invited. I'm done standing on the sidelines while the rest of you call it family and leave me out. Mom stood up, stepped toward me, reaching out her hand. Olivia, I really am sorry. I didn't realize this hurt you so much. I stepped back. It's not because I'm fragile. It's because I've been holding this in for far too long. She paused. I looked at all three of them, not with rage but with a cold clarity. I had been silent my whole life, and that silence made me disposable. But from this moment on, I wasn't going to be that person anymore. I didn't want the kind of love that came with fine print, where my presence was optional. If I couldn't be a real part of it, I'd rather step out of the frame altogether than keep playing background to someone else's spotlight. Mom stayed there, arms at her sides, her face frozen like she'd just seen something she couldn't unsee. I didn't step back. I didn't bow my head. I waited for her to say what she should have said all along. I just want you to be honest, I said, eyes locked on hers. Just once. Don't avoid it. She swallowed hard. We thought if you didn't know you wouldn't get hurt. I tilted my head. So if I didn't know, it's like I didn't exist? What made you think I was so weak I couldn't handle the truth? She stammered. It's not like that, Olivia. I just thought that I didn't need to be there, I cut in. That I wouldn't care. That I've always been fine, always independent, always the one who could take care of herself. So I didn't need to be invited. Emily shifted in her chair. You're taking this too far. Mom, just stop, Emily, I said, my voice low but steady. I've been silent long enough for you to think I'd stay that way. Not this time. She frowned slightly but didn't speak again. I could see her lips pressed tightly together like she was holding something back. But no one was changing the subject. I turned back to Mom. Do you remember my 29th birthday? You said you had to work late at the pharmacy and asked me to understand. I smiled and said it was okay. But that night, I saw the photo you posted at the Japanese restaurant with Emily. I remember exactly what sashimi you ordered because you captioned it, Mom and Baby Girl. Such a fun night. Mom flushed red, her hands tightening. Dad stayed still like he was bracing for a storm inside his own house. And that Christmas, I continued, my voice steady like a list of evidence, though emotions swelled beneath it. You told me the house was tense and you wanted a quiet holiday, so you asked me not to come home. I sat alone in my apartment eating a microwave dinner from the store. But then Emily video called to show me the new Christmas tree. Everyone was home, opening presents, laughing. No one remembered I used to sit by that tree too. Mom covered her mouth. I saw her eyes shimmer, but I didn't stop. How many times did I come by the house and no one came to greet me at the door? How many times did I talk about work and you just nodded before shifting the conversation back to Emily's job situation? How many times was I the one who texted first, and the last to get a reply? Olivia, Mom whispered. I got used to it, I said, pressing my lips together to keep my voice from cracking. I learned to accept that I was the extra in my own family. But when you all planned a trip labeled 30th wedding anniversary celebration, and I wasn't even mentioned, not a single message, not a single question, I realized everything I'd tried to believe was wrong. My dad shifted in his seat like he was about to say something, but I shook my head. I'm not blaming one person. It wasn't just Mom or Emily or you. It was all three of you, choosing again and again to leave me out. Emily leaned on the table. So what do you want? An apology? A makeup invitation? You want us to get on our knees? I looked straight at her. I want to be treated like part of this family. Not someone you remember when you need help or when it's convenient. No kneeling, no theatrics. Just honesty. Emily fell silent. I turned to my mom. Can you be honest with me? Was there ever a moment you planned to invite me on that trip? She stayed quiet for a long time. Her eyes met mine, then dropped to her hands. Finally, she nodded gently. No. I didn't plan to. I nodded back. Thank you for at least telling the truth. No one else spoke. That familiar kitchen where I used to eat dinner with them every Sunday night now echoed only with the ticking of the clock on the wall. I took a deep breath. From now on, if I'm anywhere, it's because you truly want me there. Not out of obligation. Not out of politeness. If not, I'd rather be absent. I didn't need their agreement. I didn't need them to beg me to stay. I just needed them to know. Starting now, I was no longer the empty chair they could ignore. And if someone in this house thought that was unfair, maybe it was time they asked themselves why. Emily straightened in her seat, arms crossed like a shield. She looked at me with a mix of frustration and defensiveness. You're blowing this way out of proportion, she said, her voice clear and even. You act like we deliberately cut you out, like no one ever tried with you. I let out a quiet, bitter laugh, not from amusement but disbelief. Are you talking about the time Mom told me not to come for Thanksgiving because the house was a bit cramped? Or when you posted pictures from Aunt Susan's party and not a single one of you thought to send me a message? It wasn't on purpose, Emily replied, but her voice was softer now. Everyone just always sees you as busy. You always say you're not free. You always keep your distance. I looked at her, not with blame or anger, just the exhaustion of someone who's heard the same excuses one too many times. Do I keep my distance, or has no one ever stepped toward me first? Have you ever asked if I wanted to come along? Have you ever called just to ask if I was doing okay? Emily didn't respond. My mom finally spoke, her voice as careful as walking across glass. Olivia, I know I haven't done right by you, but I'm trying to fix it. I'm sorry. I never wanted you to feel this way. I turned to her calmly. The issue isn't that you're sorry you left me out. You're sorry I found out. If I hadn't seen those photos, if I hadn't come here today, would you have ever told me? That question cut through the room like a blade. No one answered. Even my dad just looked down, hands folded tightly. I recognized that avoidance. It was the same silence that surrounded me at so many family dinners when no one spoke up for me. I don't need an apology to ease your guilt. I need the truth. Even if it's ugly. Mom let out a deep, weary sigh, like she was releasing years of burden. I know I failed. Truly. I know you've always felt like the outsider. But in my heart you've always had a place. I nodded slowly. Then why is it that for all these years I couldn't see it? Emily snapped, not loudly but no longer hiding her irritation. Do you want everyone to feel guilty forever? Do you know how exhausting it is to always play the victim? I looked at her, my voice dropping low. I don't want to be the victim. But I also don't want to be invisible. Just so this family can pretend everything's fine as long as it revolves around you. My sister bit her lip and I saw something shift in her eyes. Not because she suddenly saw she was wrong, but because for once she didn't have a comeback. This wasn't a normal conversation anymore. It had turned into a quiet war. Between me, someone finally seeking the truth, and them who had grown so used to my silence they forgot how to face the anger that had been building for years. I looked at all three of them, then spoke slowly. I don't need promises that things will change. Promises are easy. What I need is to be acknowledged. To be seen. To be invited as a real part of this family, not an optional extra. No one replied. But the silence didn't make me feel small. It confirmed everything I'd said was true, and they couldn't deny it anymore. They couldn't undo the past. But I could draw new boundaries in the present. And if they couldn't cross them with sincerity, I was ready to keep moving forward, on my own. This time with my head held high. I left the house later that afternoon as the sunlight shifted into a soft orange, brushing the treetops like the final stroke on an unfinished painting. No one walked me to the door. I didn't expect them to. I walked slowly, every step carrying years of quiet hurt I had once buried just to please them. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. I just felt light. Like something heavy on my chest had finally been lifted. In that silence, I reminded myself. From now on, I wouldn't step into any space that didn't hold room for respect. That night, I turned off my phone. No silent mode. No alarm. I placed it in the drawer beside my bed like a period at the end of a long sentence written for someone else. I made myself a simple dinner, opened the window for some fresh air, and sat quietly at the table, listening to the faint sound of cars below. The sky outside stretched wide and calm, like nothing in it had ever tried to hurt me. The next morning I woke before the sun. The first thing I did was book a vacation, for myself. Not a luxury resort. Just a quiet retreat in the Catskill Mountains about a 4-hour drive from the city. I picked a secluded wooden cabin. No cable TV, no fancy services. Just a bed, a small kitchen, a porch, and endless woods all around. I had dreamed of trips like that before. But I always put them off. Because I was busy. Because of obligations. Because I didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. Because I kept waiting for someone to come with me. I wasn't waiting. I packed light. A few comfortable outfits, a book I hadn't started, my old camera, and a brand new notebook. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I left no message. No warning. I didn't want apologies for leaving. I didn't want to be pulled back with promises that flowed as easily as breath but never meant anything. That morning when I hit the road, the city was still wrapped in fog. I drove through the familiar streets without music, without the radio. Just the hum of tires on pavement and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. I felt like I was peeling off an old skin, finally returning to something pure and real. When I arrived, the receptionist just smiled and handed me the key. No questions. No small talk. The cabin sat between two hills, pine-scented wood and creaking floorboards beneath my steps. I opened the windows. Mountain air rushed in, carrying the scent of dry grass and old trees. There I wasn't Emily's older sister. I wasn't the daughter who always held things together. I was just me, Olivia. A woman learning to step out of someone else's shadow. On the first day I did nothing but sit on the porch and watch the trees change colors. I listened to birds, to falling leaves, to the occasional sweep of wind brushing the rooftop. In that moment I didn't feel alone. I felt full, with a calmness I'd never known before. That night I lit a small fire, brewed a cup of tea and wrote in my notebook, "I'm not running away. I'm coming home." The words flowed like they'd been waiting inside me. No pressure. No hiding. Each stroke of the pen was a step away from expectations I once thought I had to live by. During the 3 days I spent there, I didn't check my messages. I didn't scroll through social media. I let the noisy world drift by like an underground current while I stood still on the shore, no longer afraid of being left behind. I cooked simple meals, read books by the window, walked along stone trails and watched the stars every night. One night, I woke up at 2 a.m. just to sit on the porch in the dark and listen to the wild sounds of the mountains. I felt small but not lost. I felt strong. Not because I was tough but because I had chosen silence over begging for someone else's presence. As I drove back toward the city, I still didn't turn my phone on. I wanted to hold on to that feeling just a little longer. The feeling of living on my own terms without needing anyone's permission. And even though I didn't know what would be waiting for me when I returned, I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer someone they could overlook so easily. I got back to New York on a late weekday afternoon. Light rain tapped against the car windows. The streets were still crowded like no one had ever left. The cabin in the Catskills now felt like it belonged to another world. A place where I could be alone without feeling empty, where silence felt like comfort instead of absence. But now I was back to my usual rhythm, back to the fifth-floor apartment with the wall I still hadn't repainted, with the plants needing water and the wooden table with that tiny crack in the corner. I turned on my phone after almost 4 days of silence. The screen lit up with dozens of unread messages and missed calls from both Mom and Emily. A few messages from Dad, always the same 3 words, "Call your mother." I sat down with a warm mug of tea in my hand, staring at the screen without opening a single thing. I could feel it clearly. My old self would have called back immediately, would have asked how they were, tried to reconnect, tried to smooth things over. But the new part of me, the one who had learned to breathe in her own space, no longer saw that as necessary. Around 9 p.m. the phone rang. It was my mother. I let it ring almost all the way through before answering. "Olivia," she said quickly as if afraid I'd hang up. "You're home, right?" I sent a few messages but didn't hear back. I leaned back, voice calm. "I just turned my phone on. I understand. I just wanted to talk." "About what?" There was a pause. "About everything. What you said. How we made you feel left out." I looked out the window where the streetlights blurred through the light rain. You didn't make me feel left out, Mom. You actually left me out. It's not a feeling. It's a fact. On the other end, she sighed. I know. I've realized that. But, can you give me a chance to? It's not about giving or not giving, Mom, I interrupted, still gentle but firm. I'm not the gatekeeper who decides who deserves forgiveness. But I'm also not the daughter who smiles and says it's fine every time she's hurt. She was quiet for a long while. Then whispered, almost like an exhale, I thought you'd call back sooner. You've always been the one to reach out first. That's exactly why, I replied. I didn't reach out this time. No arguing. No tears. Just distance. One I chose to keep, not to shut people out, but to remind myself not to shrink back in anymore. The next morning, while I was making coffee, a message came in from Emily. Short and simple. If you're ready, I'd like to talk. No explanation. No apology. No elaboration. I read it, set the phone down, and didn't reply right away. A part of me wanted to believe she had truly reflected. But I wasn't in a rush anymore. I kept living. Still went to work. Still visited the corner cafe on Saturdays. Still watered my plants, read my books, and planned my next trip to a lake region in Vermont. I hadn't cut them off. But I held on to what I needed, the right to say no when I wasn't respected. A few days later, Mom called again. She didn't say much. She just asked how I was, and when I replied, I'm okay, she stayed quiet for a moment, then said, as long as you're okay, that's what matters. Sounded like such a simple thing to say, but in it I sensed a shift. Small but real. I no longer hoped for big changes. I didn't expect my family to suddenly become perfect or be the people I used to wish they were. I just needed them to understand. If they wanted me to stay in their lives, they had to learn how to come toward me with sincerity. Not with empty promises or passing guilt. And if they couldn't, I'd still be okay. Because now I had myself. That's my story. A journey not about blame or revenge, but about reclaiming myself in relationships I once thought couldn't change. Maybe you're listening and wondering, am I living like Olivia? Am I still holding it together just to be accepted by my own family? I don't have all the answers, but I believe this. Everyone deserves to be seen, to be heard, and to choose not to keep suffering when it costs them their sense of self. Sometimes, love isn't about how many times you forgive. It's about having the courage to step out of silence to protect your worth. Have you ever had to draw a boundary with your own family? Have you ever chosen to walk away, not because you stopped loving them, but because you needed to keep your dignity? I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. Someone out there might connect with what you have to say just like you connected with me. And if stories about family, hurt, growth, and healing matter to you, be sure to subscribe. There are still so many more real stories to share. Not to complain, but to remind us all that we're never alone. Thank you for listening.